Hello, everyone, and welcome to Coffee with Innovate Finance, our podcast series where we speak to leaders across industry to talk about financial innovation and fintech. I'm Rolf Merchant, part of the team at Innovate Finance, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Dan Secretan, who is co-founder of Xapien. Dan, thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Rolf. Nice to be here. Thanks very much for having me.
Oh, well, thanks for joining us and taking the time to speak. It's great to have you. I want to talk about Xapien and some of the interesting things that the company is doing in as much sort of breadth as we can cover today. But let's talk a little bit about you yourself, Dan. It'd be great to hear a little bit about your personal background and how you came into fintech and how you came to start Xapien.
Yeah, sure. I mean, my background is I've been working in IT for feels like forever. Actually, I kind of grew up around computers. My father was really into them. He bought a BBC B back home when we were very young, and I always played around with that, loading games via tape. I remember in the day before we moved on to the real floppy disks, which were genuinely floppy in those days, but they were so much better than loading things off tape. And so, yeah, I've always been interested in what technology can do and how it can improve society and the life that we live. And I went on to study computer science at Cambridge. It was in the 90s. It was a really interesting time, actually, for the internet, because it was very nascent at that point in time. We would sort of have to go into a room, have a very slow dial-up connection. People were sort of buying domain names at that point in time with just random words because they thought they might be worth something at some point in time, so people were buying boats.com and whatever, tractors.com and whatever else they could think of, hoping to make some money out of it. It was a strange times, but they probably did well out of it. So I've always been into that. And then after I left university, I went and joined a branding consultancy, actually, to start with. I worked in a brand valuation department, which was a fascinating few years, working out how to put a price tag on a brand. And I was actually a developer in that team. We were developing a system that could automatically track the value of brands over time. So I was the only developer in a branding consultancy. I stuck out, I think, like a bit of a sore thumb. It was a Mac shop at the time. We had to sort of install Windows over the top of Mac and then develop in VB3 and things like that. It was crazy times, but I enjoyed that. But then went on to sort of grow my career in development and in architecture and systems design and things like that. And then I went into Detica, which was an IT consultancy in London, bought by BAE Systems actually in 2008, really to spearhead their foray into cybersecurity, because they were sort of aware that the world wasn't always going to be about aircraft carriers, and the world of defense was changing, and cyber defense was really important. So that was sort of that part of career, and then I moved and I started to run the NetReveal team, which is a sort of anti-money laundering, a sort of anti-fraud solution, and I was the CEO of that division at BAE Systems, which was really my introduction sort of 10, 12 years ago into financial crime and fintech. That was sort of really interesting times for me. We were developing, and as I say, sort of transaction monitoring solutions, KYC solutions. But it struck me that KYC was very much a sort of tick box exercise. It was a sort of formulaic thing, and in many ways, it was a bit of a misnomer because at the end of the process, I didn't feel like you knew your customer. You'd done some database checks on them. You'd done some ID verification. We didn't really know them in any sense. And so, yeah, that process became a tick box, but also an unmanageable burden for the organizations. So that's sort of how I got into it, I suppose. I kind of then moved on and sort of had a look at sort of other tools that were on the market, and the existing tools for doing this process really weren't enough. And I really felt we needed a new solution, and that's sort of where we came up with the idea of Xapien from.
Yeah, so tell me a bit more about that. I mean, the germ of the idea sounds really interesting, and it's sort of clear that you soaked up a lot of experience and different perspectives from what was out there at the moment. But tell us how you met your co-founder Sean, and sort of how that how that germ of an idea transformed into actually starting Xapien, And whilst you're at it, it'd be interesting to hear about the name as well, because I'm always interested to hear where new companies come up with their brand names. It's an interesting world, that one.
Yeah, well, let me tell you about that to start with. So we actually, when we founded the company, we called it Digital Insight because we were providing insight in the digital world. And it was quite a good descriptive name of what we did. But it didn't really have a lot of personality, and we decided that it was A, not very protectable, but B, it also could have applied to lots of different industries. It described us well, but could have described lots of other things. So we had a look around and thought about names for a while, and we really liked the idea of the word sapient, this sort of knowledge and wisdom. And then we moved it from sapient into sort of Homo sapien, which is literally means wise man. And we took that sort of wise bit, and then we wanted to make give that the tech factor. So we changed the S for an X, and so that gives it that sort of multiplication factor and that tech factor that we really liked. And so we came up with Xapien, which works really well for us. And that's the good story. That's the story behind it. But actually, of course, the other key point about it is that the domain name was available and we could get the .com. So that was the other reason why we came up with the name. But it suits us well. And then where did I meet Sean? So Sean was at Detica as well, but he was in the national security arena of Detica, BAE Systems. And so he was really helping HMG, Majesty's Government, understand the various different agencies, help them understand open source intelligence. So this is information which is on the internet. And what had sort of changed in the sort of 2010s was that the internet had arrived, and it was getting bigger and bigger. More and more information was going on there, and there was a lot of information on there which was sort of very valuable in terms of national security protection. But it was so big, it was sort of unmanageable, and how you get your hands around that and how you use that information was a big challenge. And so Sean was working in that area for many years, developing sort of government grade solutions for solving these challenges. And what happened really is I sort of got back together with Sean, and I said, well, actually, my customers in the banking world, in the financial services world, they really need to understand people in the same way that sort of your customers do. And if we could take the technologies or the know-how and the process that you've evolved over the last 10 years in doing this, and we could put a wrapper around, and we can make it easy, and we could make that commercial proposition, then that's actually going to be fantastic in the fintech world, because really that information explosion that's happened over the last few years means doing KYC and EDD checks really very challenging. So that was sort of what we set out to do, was to take the knowledge and know-how of doing detailed investigations, but to give it a wrapper such that all of the complexity was hidden from the user, and it was going to be as easy to use as something like Google, but it would be so much more comprehensive, and that's the birth of the company, really.
Yeah, really interesting, and it's kind of interesting to see how you fuse kind of those ideas together and try and package that up into a kind of product and solution. That's one of the biggest challenges, and it's always fascinating to hear how founders go about that journey. Something we've talked about on this podcast plenty of times before with other founders. But Dan, I want to drill into what it's like from your customers, your clients' point of view, and sort of where, what challenges they're facing at the moment, what the processes are like now, and where the value out of Xapien is within that. So if you like, where do they see the opportunities and challenges for using a sort of RegTech tool like that you're providing? What solutions, what really practical insights are you giving them?
Yeah, sure. The main sort of pain of the main pain that they find is that the traditional solutions are usually database lookup type solutions. So your basic KYC process is one way. You go to do ID verification. Is this person on the other end? Are they who they say they are? And there are some great technologies now where that industry has been totally revolutionized by a number of players. People like Onfido and people like that have done such a great job of moving the industry away from sort of, when I grew up, you had to go into the bank, you had to take a copy of your passport and to utility bills and have them photocopied and all the rest of it. And moving that into sort of taking a selfie and a picture of your driving license is amazing. So that process has sort of really been revolutionized. The next part of it, of course, is well, is there anything out there? Are you on any lists? And so people will use solutions for sanction screening, watch list screening, political exposure lists and things like that. Is my person on any of these lists? Sort of, can I do business with them? Is it legal for me to do business with them? And that's a question that everybody has to ask. It's regulatory obligation. And the solutions that do that are very much like, well, here's a list. I'm just going to screen your name against the list. And there's a number of problems with that. And one of them is that you end up with lots of false positives because you end up with lots of people with the same or similar names, particularly when you sort of transliterate that into different character sets and things like that. It becomes quite complicated, which then results in false positives that have to be cleared down. But also you kind of get to the end of the process and you're like, nope, they're not on the list. So yeah, okay, well, that's great. Is there anything you can tell me about them? If you're just onboarding a current account customer, then that's fine. That's enough. That's all you need to do. You don't need to know any more. But sometimes you just want to know, well, is there anything else out there on them? And of course there is, because with the explosion of information on the internet, there's lots of information out there. It's very hard to find. And so a very practical application is that Xapien will go and do those checks for you, the basic sort of database checks, but then it will also go and do the online research as well for you and say, this is the information that can be found if you sort of had a team of analysts behind you going and doing all this work, spending a few days or weeks looking at it. And we sort of wrapped that process up in technology.
Yeah, brilliant. And that sounds, you can see the value of deploying technology in that way so clearly. So absolutely brilliant. One
of the other side effects, actually interesting, Rolf, is that by bringing in sort of internet data, media, web, blogs, and all that sort of information, it actually allows you to stitch together the information which are traditionally sort of in silos. So corporate records information, sort of company incorporation and directorship data is available, internationally. It's obviously often of quite poor quality. You often don't get a lot of identifiers. And so you end up with some records, well, is this the same person as this person? And you can't tell because all you've got is a name, and maybe it's quite a common name, and maybe there isn't a date of birth or things like that, or addresses. And but by adding in sort of internet data, you can actually find often that maybe there's been an interview with a chap and it says, oh yeah, I ran this company and then I ran that company. You're like, oh, right, so it is the same person. Great, I can stitch those together. So you can actually stitch together better these different data sources, which are these sort of databases or structured data sources by using internet information.
Yeah, and that's a really very clear, very practical example of how it's deployed. So fantastic. Dan, you mentioned some of your industry peers in your last answer. So I wanted to kind of drill into that a little bit more, maybe just to pan out as well, thinking about, when we talk about RegTech, what these sort of companies are up to generally, thinking about the environment which they're operating as well. What sort of macro trends are you seeing? Where do you see opportunities for companies like yours over the next, shall we say, 2, 3, 4 years? Can we expect growth? And if so, in what sort of areas?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's lots of really interesting macro trends. I mean, one of the ones I'll pick on first, I think, is probably, maybe I'll pick on 3, but I'll pick first. I'm going to talk about the sort of definition of risk, if you like. I think what's happening, we are seeing a move away from the traditional black and white risk, like, are you on a criminal records list? Are you bankrupt director? Is there some legal proceedings against you? And things are moving more into sort of possibly what could be termed ESG type risks. So are there sort of, are there environmental risks? Is this organization that you're about to onboard known as a big polluter? Are they associated with China in some way, or much more relevant at the moment, Russia? In some manner, are there sort of harassment cases? Are there any sort of allegations out there that you'd like to know about? And this really has really been brought home to us by some of our customers in the sort of charities and university sector. They're really ahead of the game in this, to be honest with you, in many ways, because they're very values-driven organizations. And when they take donations from people, they really want to know where that donations come from. And does the company or the individual share their beliefs in environmental issues or modern day slavery issues or whatever it is? and how do they go away and how they go around and find that sort of information? It's not on the traditional database checks. It's not on sanctions lists and watch lists. It's like, well, this person's made all their money in tobacco. Well, that's great, and that's fine in many ways for many people. But for a cancer charity, that's a complete no-no, and they don't want to take money from anybody that's made their money in big tobacco. And those sorts of risks, that sort of much more a grey or personalised view on risk, is really we see pervading everywhere now. Almost all organisations managing reputation and not doing business with people who don't share your values is not just the preserve of the sort of third sector, the charities, universities, and people like that. Actually, almost all organizations now are very interested in this, and that's a really growing trend. You see it in investments, asset managers, banks, and things like that all have ESG type portfolios. Supply chain is really important in. So lots of people are really sort of moving with that macro trend, and I'm sure you're seeing other Innovate Finance members really looking at that as a theme.
Yeah, indeed. And thinking about that sort of thematically, I do have sort of one last question as well. I wanted to sort of just pick up on thinking about sort of RegTech impact more generally, because one of the things we're sort of thinking about as the industry body is how we can kind of communicate a little bit more about what some of these companies, which, you know, they are B2B, they're operating a little bit in the background of financial services, but still really impactful, really important. Where do you see, and I'm you know, you can answer this from Xapien's point of view, or perhaps more generally from a RegTech industry-wide point of view, where do you see the sort of biggest impact being made? Is it sort of on that financial crime side? Is it a bit more broad than that? If you were to sort of sum up what RegTech's doing in, you know, in the most kind of bold terms, what do you think its main impact is right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's so relevant at the moment. You see the world has just really changed with the war in the Ukraine, and I think regulation drives, and it can drive innovation. I think that is what RegTech is all about, isn't it? It's all about driving that innovation and change for the world and for the health of the world in many different aspects. And so that's the piece that I would really sort of focus on. I mean, we see things like data transparency. I would probably pick as a sort of, you know, a theme that's really happening. A way to combat corruption is to make transparent data around incorporations, directorships, and things like that. Make that available, because once that's available, then organizations in our domains can then use that information. They can find ways of looking for patterns and activities. Once you make that data available, everything can happen. People become accountable, and it's the fact that in the past it's been much more hidden. That privacy aspect has been so important, still is in some jurisdictions, but that just leads to hiding ill-gotten gains and hiding corruption. And so I'm really proud to live and work in the UK. I think Companies House does a great job at making that data, good quality data, available to everybody, and available to companies like ours and lots of others of your members, such that we can actually help combat corruption in the world.
Really nice, Dan. I think that's a really important message to get across. So absolutely brilliant. We're nearly at the end. I do want to ask one final question, which is quite a simple one, really, which is where next for you and for Xapien? What can we expect to hear from you over the next few months?
Yeah, look, I mean, there's loads of stuff going on, Rolf. As you can imagine, the system currently works in 108 languages. You know, we transliterate from Russian and Arabic and Israeli and loads of different languages. But we need to improve that. Sort of every organization, even if they're based in the UK, needs to do business with people all over the world. The world's increasingly globalized, and all systems need to work in different languages. So we are developing technologies that understand names in different languages, can translate the content, can find local language things. That's a big focus for us. More in the sort of ESG and reporting space as well. That's as I say, it's a big global trend, and it's something that we're focusing a lot on. And then I'd say probably if I was going to pick a third one, I'd pick this concept of sort of perpetual KYC. At the moment, organizations have to redo the sort of KYC checks on various intervals, depending on the risk. But it's a very it's such an expensive process for those organizations to go back through that. It's a poor client experience. It's a poor onboarding experience to start with. And I think that technology can really add a huge part in here, because we can actually now look at information as it comes out. We can monitor it. We can stitch it together. We can remove false positives, and we can really alert or let the correct teams know when there's new bits of information that are relevant and sort of weren't known before. So yeah, perpetual KYC is going to be a big piece for us as well, Rolf.
Yeah, excellent. That's really clear, Dan. Lots of exciting stuff there. So looking forward to seeing how it all develops and comes to market, and yeah, looking forward to hearing more. But that's a good place to stop, actually, Dan. Loads of really interesting stuff there. Lots about Xapien, and good to get such a thorough introduction to what you're doing. So listen, thank you so much for joining. I hope you enjoyed yourself.
No, thanks very much for having me, Rolf. It's great to talk to you. Thanks for having me.
No, likewise. And yes, looking forward to hearing more from you guys in future as well. But for now, we will have to stop. That is the end of this episode. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in and listening. Please do keep an eye out for upcoming episodes. We do have many more conversations with fintech players planned. And of course, we have all of our previous episodes available to listen to on our website. So please do take a look at our back catalogue for many more insights on fintech and financial innovation. My thanks once again to our guest today, Dan Secretan, co-founder of Xapien. Thank you at home for listening, and do join us next time for Coffee with Innovate Finance. Bye for now.